The air was
It's such
heavy
an honor
before
to
a
meet
single
you.
word was
Your
spoken.
work has been
Cameras
truly
rolled, the
inspirational.
hearing room silent except for
such
the
an honor
soft
to
hum
meet
of
you.
lights
Your
overhead.
work has been
Then,
truly
like a match
inspirational.
striking in the dark, Jasmine Crockett's voice sliced through the stillness. "So tell me, Judge, do you even understand what justice means anymore?" Gasps rippled through the audience. Phones came up, red record lights blinking. The line wasn't just disrespect, it was an open challenge. And across the table, Judge Ruth Bader didn't flinch. Her eyes held a calm that felt almost impossible, like someone who'd weathered storms far greater than a congressional insult. The tension was electric. Crockett leaned back, confident, her smirk playing to the cameras. She thought she'd cornered her opponent, but something in the judge's stillness unsettled her. A storm was gathering behind that calm expression, and everyone could feel it. Whispers spread through the crowd. Staffers froze mid-note. Even the moderator hesitated before continuing. This wasn't just another exchange. It was the start of something bigger, a confrontation that would echo far beyond the walls of that room. Judge Ruth adjusted her glasses, voice steady but sharp enough to cut glass. "Congresswoman," she said, "justice isn't a slogan you shout when the cameras are rolling. It's the weight of every truth you refuse to face." The room exhaled in stunned silence. No one knew it yet, but that single sentence was about to ignite a national firestorm, one that would test dignity, power, and the very meaning of truth itself. And as the echo of her words lingered, the question that hung in the air was simple. What would happen when the world finally saw who stood on the right side of that line? The clip spread within minutes, first on Twitter, then across every platform with a pulse. Millions watched as that single exchange became the lightning rod for a nation already divided by exhaustion and doubt. Hashtags erupted, commentators pounced. "Arrogance versus integrity," one headline read. But beneath the noise, something deeper stirred, because this wasn't just about two women in a hearing room. It was about what America still chose to believe in when the lights went out. For some, Crockett's defiance represented the swagger of power unchecked, the idea that volume wins over virtue. For others, Judge Ruth's composure became a quiet revolution in itself. Immigrants, students, workers, people who'd been told to sit down, stay quiet, take less space, saw themselves in her restraint. That calm was resistance. That silence was strength. And yet, the stakes reached beyond symbolism. Policies were on the line, rights debated in real time. The question wasn't who raised their voice louder, but who spoke with truth when the microphones faded. The hearing had become a mirror, reflecting the country's moral fracture. Ego versus empathy, spectacle versus service. Behind closed doors, strategists scrambled, networks prepared special segments. The public demanded to know, would Judge Ruth fight back or remain the picture of dignified restraint? Because in this America, dignity could look like weakness until the moment it turned unstoppable. Somewhere, a producer whispered what everyone was already thinking. This wasn't just politics. It was a reckoning. And as the camera zoomed back in on that silent, steady figure, a single thought pulsed through the nation. If she answered again, history might just shift on its axis. Before the cameras in the spotlight, before she became a name trending in outrage and applause, Jasmine Crockett was known for something else. Ambition that burned too hot to hide. Her rise was meteoric. A firebrand attorney turned politician who thrived on confrontation. In her world, winning meant being louder, sharper, and more defiant than anyone else in the room. She spoke of justice, yet too often turned it into theater. Her reputation wasn't built on quiet victories, but viral moments that left audiences divided and headlines buzzing. Her early rallies had been electric: chants, fists in the air, promises to fight for the voiceless. But behind the stage lights, a different picture emerged. Former aides whispered about her temper, her insistence on loyalty over truth. She dismissed questions not with reason, but with ridicule. She called it passion. Others called it ego dressed as purpose. Critics remembered the moment she berated a small-town activist during a televised town hall, a woman asking about health care for her immigrant father. Crockett's reply went viral for all the wrong reasons. "You don't understand policy. You understand pity." The clip resurfaced after the hearing, and the contrast was damning. The same arrogance that once fed her fame was now exposing her fault lines. But Crockett couldn't see it. To her, confrontation was control. The more she provoked, the more powerful she felt. Every viral soundbite was proof that she was shaping the narrative. What she didn't realize was how quickly narratives turn. The crowd she once commanded with bravado was beginning to look past the noise, to the cracks in her armor, the contradictions between her slogans and her actions. Now, facing Judge Ruth, she believed she was in familiar territory, a televised clash she could dominate. Yet as the silence deepened and the cameras rolled, something about this moment felt different. The script she'd relied on her entire career, attack, deflect, overwhelm, suddenly wasn't working. And for the first time, arrogance began to look a lot like fear. Long before she ever wore the robe, Ruth Bader's story was written in the margins of struggle. She was the daughter of immigrants who arrived with nothing but heavy accents and heavier hopes. Her mother worked nights, her father took odd jobs, and the word American was never something they claimed by birth. It was something they earned, piece by piece. In their small apartment, books were sacred, and justice wasn't a career. It was a promise to the people who'd been told they didn't belong. Ruth grew up understanding the quiet weight of dignity. She watched her mother face discrimination with grace so measured it became her daughter's first lesson in restraint. Every insult absorbed without retaliation, every injustice met with calm endurance. It shaped her like steel, tempered in silence. When teachers dismissed her, she studied harder. When classmates mocked her accent or her name, she smiled and held her ground. There was no shouting, no spectacle, just the quiet conviction that truth, in time, speaks louder than noise. Years later, when she entered law school, she was one of the few women in her class, balancing coursework with caring for her ailing husband. Professors told her she was wasting her talent. Judges refused to hire her because of her gender. But Ruth learned early that exclusion was a teacher too. She found strength not in anger, but in endurance, the discipline to keep showing up even when the world told her she wasn't welcome. Her rise through the legal ranks was not meteoric. It was deliberate. Each case she took wasn't about fame, but about fairness. Women denied opportunities, families threatened with deportation, workers silenced by bureaucracy. Her victories were quiet, often unnoticed, but each one rippled outward, touching lives she would never meet. And though her tone was soft, her words carried the gravity of truth. People listened not because she demanded it, but because she'd earned it. By the time she sat in that hearing room across from Jasmine Crockett, Ruth had spent decades turning adversity into authority. Her calm wasn't weakness, it was armor built from every trial she'd survived. Behind her composed expression lived the memory of every immigrant mother holding her child's hand at a border, every worker standing against injustice, every woman told she was too small to matter. She represented more than herself. She carried the weight of millions who'd been dismissed, doubted or disrespected, and yet refused to break. That's why when Crockett challenged her with condescension, Ruth didn't rise in anger. She didn't need to. Her story had already proven what silence, integrity, and endurance could do. And somewhere in that crowded room, as the cameras captured her stillness, even her critics felt it, the undeniable presence of someone who had faced every form of dismissal and turned it into purpose. They didn't just see a judge. They saw the living proof that dignity, no matter how quietly it stands, can command the loudest room. But this calm before the storm wouldn't last long, because the next word spoken would test everything Ruth believed about restraint and reveal just how powerful quiet truth could be when arrogance pushed too far. The air thickened as the exchange sharpened. What had begun as a disagreement now pulsed with something heavier, an unspoken dare between two women who refused to yield. Jasmine Crockett leaned forward, eyes narrowed, her voice rising just enough to command the microphones. "You hide behind your title, Judge," she said, lips curling into a smirk. "But when it comes to real people, real struggle, you're nowhere to be found." A murmur rippled through the chamber. Reporters scribbled furiously, sensing a headline in the making. But Ruth didn't blink. Her gaze remained steady, a calm surface masking a rising current beneath. She took a slow breath before replying, her words deliberate, edged with quiet fire. "If by real struggle you mean the years spent defending those without voices," she said, "then I suppose I've been hiding in plain sight." The jab landed clean. A few in the audience stifled gasps. One aide covered her mouth. Crockett straightened, trying to laugh it off, but the sound faltered. "That's a nice speech," she shot back, "but people are tired of speeches. They want action. They want someone who fights." Ruth's eyes softened, almost pitying. "Then you mistake volume for victory," she said. The room fell silent again, and this time the silence burned. Crockett's composure cracked just enough for the cameras to catch it, a twitch at the corner of her mouth, the faintest tremor in her voice as she started to interrupt. But Ruth spoke over her, not louder, just firmer. "Justice doesn't shout. It endures." The tension was unbearable. Even the lights seemed to hum louder, the crowd holding its breath for what came next. Crockett opened her mouth to respond, but then stopped, realizing too late that the momentum had shifted. Ruth wasn't just defending herself anymore. She was rewriting the power dynamic, right there, live, for the entire nation to see. And as that realization set in, the energy in the room tilted, away from anger, toward awe. What happened next would decide which side of history this moment belonged to. The clip exploded across the internet before the session even adjourned. Within hours, timelines were ablaze. Hashtag Justice's Responsibility climbed to the top of trending lists worldwide. Edits of Ruth's calm takedown flooded TikTok and X. Some layered with music, others slowed down for dramatic effect. Millions of viewers replayed that quiet moment when power bent to poise. The comments were relentless. "She didn't shout. She didn't need to. This is what dignity looks like." News outlets scrambled to frame the story. Conservative pundits called it an overreaction to civility. Progressives called it a masterclass in grace under fire. But beyond politics, something deeper was happening. People saw in Ruth a reflection of everything they'd been told to suppress. Immigrants posted their own stories of being spoken over, dismissed, and underestimated. Students quoted her line about chaos and courage in graduation speeches. Activists turned her words into rally banners. Justice isn't loud. It endures. Late-night hosts replayed the clip with awe. Even skeptics admitted it hit differently. There was no grandstanding, no theatrics, just the kind of moral clarity that cut through all the noise. Comment sections became confessionals, strangers sharing how that moment gave them hope, how it reminded them that truth still had a voice. And for Jasmine Crockett, the storm was unforgiving. Old clips resurfaced, past arrogance replayed beside Ruth's composure. Her staff released statements about being taken out of context, but the narrative had already solidified. The contrast was too stark, too cinematic to ignore. Anger versus integrity, noise versus stillness. By week's end, the phrase Ruth Bader moment had entered the cultural lexicon, a shorthand for the power of restraint in a world obsessed with volume. And as the nation debated, laughed, and shared, one thing was certain: this wasn't just a vile exchange. It was a shift, a reminder that in an age of shouting, quiet conviction could still shake the world. When the headlines finally faded and the frenzy quieted, what lingered was not the clash, but the calm that followed it. Ruth's words echoed far beyond the hearing room, settling into conversations at dinner tables, classrooms, and break rooms across the country. People replayed that final line, "Justice isn't a weapon, it's a responsibility," and found in it something that politics had long forgotten: grace without surrender. In a culture addicted to outrage, Ruth had done the unthinkable. She'd made silence powerful again. Her restraint had become a mirror, forcing the nation to confront what it had become. Every insult she refused to return, every pause she let breathe, carried its own lesson: that dignity isn't weakness, and decency isn't defeat. Her composure didn't erase anger, it elevated it, turning frustration into focus, emotion into resolve. Communities that had long felt invisible found validation in her stillness. Immigrant families saw a symbol of quiet endurance. Women recognized the strength of not flinching when belittled. Young people saw proof that calm could be revolutionary. Ruth didn't just win an argument, she restored faith in how battles for truth could be fought. When asked later how she kept her composure, she said, "Because the moment you let anger speak for you, you've already given your power away." Those words spread faster than any clip, written on protest signs, quoted in classrooms, stitched into murals. It wasn't just a response, it was a philosophy, a blueprint for a generation exhausted by noise. And as the nation moved on, one idea endured: that real power doesn't come from shouting louder, it comes from standing taller. Ruth had reminded the country that justice, in its purest form, doesn't humiliate, it heals. But even as her message inspired millions, one lingering question remained: would the world remember this lesson when the next storm began to rise? The room emptied, but the impact didn't fade. Millions had witnessed a moment where dignity outshone arrogance, where truth held the spotlight without raising its voice. And now, the question isn't who won the argument, it's what you do with the lesson. Carry it forward. Stand firm when the world tries to silence you. Speak with conviction, act with integrity, and let your values ripple farther than any noise ever could. Subscribe, share, and be part of a movement that refuses to let courage go unnoticed. Because moments like this aren't just watched, they're lived.